Plans for a £30 billion high-speed rail network for the Midlands were unveiled today.
I mean, this is big transformational change over a long period.
We're up to our necks in debt in England through somebody's fault.
HS2! Stop! HS2!
I hesitate before coming in and simply scrapping a great national project.
HS2!
We're going to lock off this bit, we're going to stop here, we're going to slow it down, we're going to do this, we're going to scrap it, we're going to go ahead as it is. But all of these theories I've read in the press have been untrue.
I don't think it should be abandoned. I think it's extremely expensive.
Is the Eastern Leg going to happen?
You will have to wait and see exactly what we're going to do.
Now, some see today's cancellation of the Eastern Leg as a sign that it's worth continuing to protest against the line continuing to the West Midlands. But they say it will damage ancient woodlands and destroy habitats. But of course, others say they're excited about the potential economic impact. Callum Watkinson reports.
In woodland near Swinnerton in Staffordshire, protesters are aware they are here for the long haul. The bulk of the work is not due to start until 2024. But those who plan to protect these trees say plans to rip them down are increasingly out of step with current global sentiment.
COP26 has said they was going to halt all deforestation, but with that there's still the Western Leg part. So I'm hoping that they realise that once now they've cancelled the Eastern Leg, that the business case and the ecological case is totally flat, and they'll hopefully see sense and that they should stop this part of the leg.
But there's parliamentary approval for this bit already, isn't there?
There is parliamentary approval, but, you know, Boris likes a U-turn, and I'm sure he'll carry on with them.
All the materials, food and much of the clothing for this protest camp are donated by local people also opposed to the project. At Stafford's ageing railway station later, though, I caught up with a spokesman for the local Chamber of Commerce who are still supporting it. You've got a station in Birmingham, you've got a station in Crewe. This train line is going to leapfrog the county in terms of people being able to use it, but they are losing some of their woodland. They're having their properties compulsory purchased in some cases. Why should they be excited about it?
I think the most important thing is that clearly from the Chamber perspective is the jobs that are being created. HS2 are looking to create in the region of 5,000 to 7,000 jobs, we understand, in the area. Not only in the construction trades, but also in the trades and businesses that support construction.
In Birmingham, always heavily invested in HS2, the council leader said today's news was a blow to the people of the city and the West Midlands. Meanwhile, the author of a highly critical review of HS2 published last year said that the 40 miles of the Eastern Leg that will still be built is pointless.
You're hardly going to get up to the speeds that they're talking about before you've got to slow down a bit. They could easily integrate this with the existing lines, and there's several of them, maybe put in 4 tracks to allow overtaking of the stopping services, and do that very much more cheaply.
Even here in the West Midlands, where HS2 is hanging in there, today was a good day for those opposed to this project, who have taken the news as vindication and encouragement. And they may need a bit of that in the cold months ahead. Callum Watkinson, ITV News.
We'll be discussing around half a dozen proposals which have been drawn up for buses, trains and trams across the Midlands, which were dependent on HS2 going ahead in
Well, in preparation for the now scrapped route, hundreds of homes and businesses were bought up by HS2 Limited, the government-owned company building the railway. But what will happen to those properties now? Well, Lewis Warner is live in Long Eaton in Derbyshire for us this evening, which, Lewis, I guess is pretty typical of many towns and villages which have had its communities changed forever.
Well, yes, homeowners on streets like this one say they've been living in limbo for the last few years after finding out they were on the route for HS2. This road here, Bonsall Street, was told it was going to be ripped in two. The houses on this side would certainly be gone. Over there, they would stay, but they'd have HS2 running down the middle. Now, many people here are pleased that their homes are safe. However, for those that have already moved out, they say the agony of the last few years was completely unnecessary. This is as close as Valerie can get to her former home of 30 years. She lived on Bonsall Street in Long Eaton until 2 years ago, when her home was bought by HS2 via compulsory purchase. Now the line won't come this far north, meaning she moved for nothing.
I'm glad that it's been scrapped, that HS2 has been scrapped, but I'm very disappointed that I've given my home up for all them years for no need, very unnecessarily, and the stress that went with it. Which went on for years.
Would you still be living there now?
Yes, I would have been. Yes, because I got very happy memories there, and there was nothing I wanted doing to the house. Quite emotional because I had a lot of happy years here. You know, a lot of happy years.
But Valerie isn't alone. Diane Scott needlessly moved out of her 17th century cottage in Long Eaton. She'd lived there for 19 years and spent £100,000 updating it. In 2018, we filmed with her as HS2 haggled over the price of her dream home. After much back and forth, she eventually reached a deal to sell. Today's decision comes too late for Diane. As it does for Roger Lim. We filmed with him in 2013. Roger had lived in a former railway station house for 50 years. He moved away, leaving the house empty, all for nothing. In Long Eaton town centre, protesters gathered to hear the news being announced in the Commons and breathe a collective sigh of relief.
Elated and delighted that this isn't going to happen. It's been hanging over our heads for 4 or 5 years now. My wife's got cancer, and the last thing we needed was more disruption.
I would have been able to see it and hear it from my front room, and I heard it was like 6 trains an hour.
Oh yeah, it's been worrying. It's been a very stressful time. It's something we could have done without.
I'm very pleased, and I just hope that the plan that they have got is going to be suitable for our environment, for our commuting.
On Tyree Close in Trow, homeowners can sleep easy after years of uncertainty. Stephen Harold agrees with the government's new plan to stop HS2 trains south of Towton at East Midlands Parkway.
I'm being biased, but it makes perfect sense to have it on there. It's closer to all the infrastructures, closer to Castle Donington Industrial Estates, it's closer to the motorway. It makes perfect sense to do that.
At this upholstery warehouse in Long Eaton, staff have been making sofas and cushions for 57 years. They lost one warehouse to a compulsory purchase. The owner says it put the business under a lot of strain and that somebody needs to answer for the money that's been wasted.
The amount of money that's been spent, I know from our point of view, the money that's been spent on just this few metres of line is incredible, and I do think somebody should be accountable, definitely.
Hundreds of homes and businesses were taken on by HS2 Limited. If former owners now want their properties back, they might not be happy. Alistair Frew is a solicitor from Sutton Coldfield. He's dealt with clients that have lost property to HS2 and says they'll have to be willing to pay a higher price.
If the government forces you to sell or threatens that it's about to force you to sell, you can seek, under what we call the critchel down guidelines, you can make the government sell it back to you at market value. However, that's the new market value, not the old market value.
After years of debate, many homeowners are now free from the fear that HS2 brought them, but their communities have been changed forever. Well, in the last few days, I've been speaking to many people who say they're going to really now try and put the last few years of HS2 uncertainty to the back of their minds. They hope that this decision today will finally allow them to do that for good.
Yeah, well, I've literally just got off a train that's been taking the Prime Minister from Wolverhampton back down to London Euston. I asked him about the big announcement today, which is that HS2 will no longer go all the way to Leeds. Now, that's important because a lot of people in the Midlands, especially in the East Midlands, had to sell their homes and move because they thought, and he promised, that it would go all the way up there. I asked him if he thought it was right to apologise to those people. Prime Minister, hundreds of people have had to sell their homes and move because of HS2. A lot of those will be in the East Midlands. They were under the impression that it was going up to Leeds. That's something they thought was going to happen, that you promised. Do you think it's right to apologise to those people who've had to sell their homes and move?
Look, I think what you're seeing today is a colossal investment in rail capacity for the East Midlands, for the West Midlands, and for the first time in the history of this country, we're not just building the Transpennine, high-speed Transpennine link, but we're building a high-speed link from the East Midlands to the west of the East Midlands, or vice versa. There's no point in having massive plans to excavate, to dig up miles and miles of virgin countryside over decades, spending hundreds of £1 billion, when you can use some existing line to get the effects much earlier.
So no apology there from the Prime Minister, but he did insist that the money that's being invested into the country's transport network will benefit people in the East and West Midlands for years to come.
Well, although this news was confirmed today, we've been predicting the downgrading of HS2 for 2 years. Here's our business correspondent Mark Goff breaking the story ahead of a government review into HS2 back in October 2019.
Mark, what details can you give us?
Yeah, well, two sources I've spoken to. One is very close to the review panel. One is very close to HS2, the company. But what both sources have told me is that the stretch from Birmingham through to East Midlands and Yorkshire, that will not now go ahead.
Well, that reporting drew a swift denial from Grant Shapps on Twitter at the time, calling it totally untrue. And even though the review itself didn't call for the scrapping of the eastern leg, it does seem that our prediction turned out to be correct. Well, with me now is rail industry expert Michael Byng, who provided information and insight to that review panel back in 2019. Michael, thanks for joining us on the programme this evening. Where are we?
I personally think we're in the wilderness. We've had decisions to curtail part of the project today. We've had an integrated rail plan for the North and the Midlands. If you could have an integrated rail plan, it has to be for the country. So we really need to think all over again.
We seem to have seen so many instances throughout the life of HS2 where the plans just crumble at the seams. Was it doomed to fail from the start, do you think?
It was a train crash, metaphorically and literally, waiting to happen. Side Business School advised HS2 and the DFT in 2015 what was likely to happen. They repeated the advice in 2019. It happens to be very similar to the information I gave to the Oakley Review. So the costs of this project and the difficulty with delivering it and its programme have been known for some very considerable time.
I guess the government now, today, though, would say the billions of pounds of investment is coming to the Midlands, East and West.
It probably is, but it may have to make do without a high-speed rail link, certainly to the East Midlands.
So where do we go from here? What next for transport in the Midlands?
Transport in the Midlands needs to rethink as to what's required post-COVID and post-lockdown. The need to create sustainable, reliable, efficient transport hubs in the East Midlands, around Nottingham and Derby, in the West Midlands in Birmingham, as well as elsewhere in the country at Liverpool and Manchester and Leeds.